So this is the Module 3 assignment about Constructivism and Vygotsky. To begin, about Constructivism, essentially this is a theory about how we learn. We ultimately learn, according to this theory, through our experiences and then reflecting on those experiences. So it's a social process, it's a behavioral process, it involves a lot of doing and then thinking about that doing. How that exists in the classroom would be in opportunities with real authentic problem solving that most likely begins with an inquiry model, and that could be found through activities such as debates or experiments or a number of different things that promote the idea of asking questions in order to seek answers. For those debates, those experiments, those activities to be as authentic as possible, there should be a real world connection, something that students are actually trying to solve, not just, for instance, solving for X. And additionally, on top of that, there should be a process where students are encouraged to think about their thinking. This metacognitive process, that component, becomes really important because that active reflection allows anybody learning, but in particular students, it allows them to recognize perhaps where they began in terms of their knowledgeability, things that they have considered, things that they've tried, things that have failed, things that worked, why that worked, and then grow in their knowledge from there as they recognize and reflect on the processes that were involved in their problem solving. Ideally, this exists in a collaborative model as well. So as opposed to independent thinking and production, the idea of working together to solve problems is very constructivist. It's also most likely the most real world in terms of life skills that we're teaching students. It's very rare for individuals to work in a field in their career where they're not working with others or solving problems with others. So we probably should be teaching students how to do that and do that well while they're in high school, as opposed to just individually and independently drill them. The last major component that I would focus on is the shifting role of the teacher. So instead of somebody who is directing the instruction, who is just simply dictating information, providing information, depositing information somewhere, that the teacher really becomes more like a guide or like a coach in this model, because as students are working in their inquiry models, they need that more knowledgeable other or someone who is able to make sure that the thinking stays on track, make sure that standards remain high, make sure not even that all answers are correct, because as we've read and seen, there's certainly value in getting problems wrong and learning why they were wrong, failing and learning the value of failing and why something failed. But really just that model of the teacher as somebody who's there to guide, to be not the same as a peer, but probably more equal than the current model of a teacher up in front of the room. So Vygotsky is a dominant constructivist in the field, and that's really largely due to his social development theory. So just like back in Constructivism, where we had that it was this theory about learning, we go back that we learn by doing again, and that we learn by interacting, that the social component comes first, and then later it becomes embedded into us as individuals, but that social piece has to come first. Additionally, his theory of the zone of proximal development really reflects that continuous cycle of deepening our knowledge by constantly realizing what we know, what we have learned, maybe what questions we now have, and that last part, the questions that we now have that come out of the reflection process, pushes our zone of proximal development into its next stage. So it's constantly expanding and growing. And then, as we said in the last slide too, when we were discussing this shifting role of a teacher from from the expert to the guide, that now we are represented as a more knowledgeable other. So in terms of myself, how constructivist am I? My first answer is that it depends. So I teach two subjects. I teach Avid and I teach English. And everything that I was reading really reminded me of my Avid class. In particular, the Harland piece about the zoology course and the problem-based learning. So in Avid, 2 days a week, we do a very structured tutorial, and that is completely in line with the collaborative nature and the inquiry model that all of this is based on. And in fact, my grade book has categories that include collaboration and inquiry as the title of the categories that make up my Avid students' grades. In English, that's probably where I have more that I can do. I will say that we have a class that does rely on frequent discussion, that I do provide a great deal of scaffolds, most often with writing instruction, I would say, and that is in an attempt to push and extend that zone of proximal development. What can students do? Because I know that they're not ready to just jump out and complete high quality essays without assistance in structure and suggestion, but that I also don't need to be doing it for them. So I try to be that more knowledgeable other in pushing them towards a final product. I would say that I do have an authentic reflective piece that I am proud of, and it's our digital portfolios that we do for our semester finals. And really that's just grabbing students' English work over the course of the semester and reflecting on it. They have a bank of reflection questions they can choose from, and they vary from what would you add to this, what would you take away from this unit, and why? Why would you make certain changes to what we learned based on what you would have liked to learn and what we didn't? Where do you feel like you grew as a reader, as a writer, those sorts of things? It's nice to be able to pause and give them that opportunity. And then finally, I don't know how to say his name, Smagorinsky, discussed this emotional engagement that Vygotsky had promoted with works. And to me, that reminded me of my teaching of To Kill a Mockingbird in class, and we have a whole unit that's centered on empathy. And so I just thought, a lot of the conversations that we have, a lot of the work that we do, it's tied to this emotional connection, this engagement with what we're reading, and it does make it come alive. It does make it more valuable and meaningful for myself as the teacher and for the kids, I think, as well. So how I can improve in the future is definitely more in my English class, something that I think I'm lacking, and I'm looking forward to actually our big project in this sense with the issue-centered inquiry project is to add more real-world application and project-based learning in my English class. I will say that I feel confident that I'm not just checking off titles off of a list for what I'm teaching. We've definitely worked hard to focus on skills and aligning to our standards, but that doesn't mean that it is authentic for students or relevant for students, or that they feel like they're ever solving any problems, and I see the value in that. I also think that I could have a greater promotion of collaboration in my English classroom. I have a hard time, when they have independent work time, I usually encourage them to work together, allow them to work together, and we do have occasional group projects. But other than that, I feel like it's a pretty individual class that, whatever we're reading, they're tested on it individually, or they're asked to write on it individually. And I wonder how I could increase collaborative structures in that class. Tied to that first PBL one, like I said, modernizing our curriculum to be a little more issue-centered, maybe having a grading model that values the learning process over the products that they create. That's a really difficult thing. I appreciated that, again, that zoology piece and all the project-based learning, but that also used university students. And unfortunately, in a high school setting, we have kids who are very motivated by their grades, for better or for worse. And sometimes I feel like I get stuck playing the points game too. But, we need some kind of way to hold rigor and accountability, but also not penalize them for thinking and trying and taking their time and exploring their learning. The final thing that I took away in the Smagorinsky piece was that idea of writing to learn. I could definitely do that more informally, more often, without this need to have everything be syntactically and grammatically correct, but just opportunities for reflection and learning logs and more informal writing. So that is my presentation on constructivism and its ties to Vygotsky.